Hello and welcome to Dateline NBC. My name is Ashley Oswald, and tonight's special is on four Mexican Americans: a general, farmer, wife, and railroader. We'll be taking an inside look on how these families lived, how they survived, and how they overcame obstacles of war, deception, and emotional turmoil that they endured during the late 17th and early 18th century.
I'm a General Santa Anna, a former general in the Mexican Army. I led soldiers into the Alamo and participated in the Mexican-American War. I was called upon to attack and take over the Alamo when the 170-some Texan rebels were defying the Mexican government and trying to start their own state. So what we did was 2,500 or so Mexican Army soldiers, led by myself, we marched up to the Alamo and gave them a choice to surrender. After a few days of fighting, we ended up being able to take over the Alamo, and we killed every Texan in the Alamo. And after a few years, it was kind of a cool period where Texas was trying to be taken by the American government. And after the American government declared Texas as a state, as its territory, that was an act of war. They thought south of the Rio Grande was Mexican border, and north of it was the American territory. Well, we objected. I was once called again to serve Mexico, and we had fought with the American Army, and the outcome was that we were eventually pushed south of the Rio Grande, and we kept having skirmishes and big battles. However, we kept being overwhelmed by American forces, and ultimately we were surrounded into Mexico City. We were bombarded for a few days with heavy fighting, and ultimately we lost the city and the war. The American troops stayed there until we signed the Treaty of Guadalupe-Hidalgo, which gave the Americans their territory, what they wanted. It took over pretty much half of Mexico, plus they gave us $15 million. But along with that, we were supposed to have every Mexican farmer and citizen who is now in the United States territory was supposed to have every legal right as every other American citizen under the Constitution. However, that was false. It didn't happen, and my people had to continuously fight for their lands, even though sometimes it would take up to 17 years, give or take a little. We would have to pay them with our land. We would have to give them our land, or we'd have to take out high interest loans from the banks. And ultimately, most of us lost our land because we couldn't prove it, and migrated back south of the new Mexican-American border.
How are you doing? Lawyer Aaron Smith.
I'm General Valerio.
All right now, so what brings you here today, sir?
Well, I want to see if I can get my land back, because under the Treaty of Guadalupe-Hidalgo, I'm supposed to be able to claim my land and get it all back, what you Americans took away from us.
Us Americans? And, you're a Mexican immigrant. Now, you say that you want your land back. What kind of documents do you bring that say that this is your land?
The land's been in my family's for centuries now. We don't have any proof of land. I can't prove through legal documentation that this is my land, but we've been here for hundreds of years, and all we want is our land back.
Been here for hundreds of years. It's a cute little fairy tale story that you tell your kids. But this is our land. Manifest Destiny says it is, and we're gonna be here to stay. Now, if you do want some land now, son, you can definitely go to a bank, give us some money, and then we'll give you a quarter, 1/4 of your land, 1/3 maybe, to be nice, throw in a mule.
well, I'd be willing to give you some money and some of my land, but I don't want it to take up to 17 years like some instances I've heard. I kind of want this to go back fast so we can get back producing our agricultural crops and get back with our way of life, what we had before the invasion of the white man.
You know, times are changing now. It's 1800s. It's all about the industry. Industry equals money. Farmland and agriculture is out of the picture. So I tell you, we'll make a deal like this. Either you give me some money, or there's no land, since you have no documents, and since you are an immigrant. Top it off from Mexican immigrants.
But you're gonna have to prove that it's my land so I can sell my land and then give you some of the money. So you have to do that first.
This is America. We are the ones in charge. You listen to us. So with that being said, this is no deal.
Well, then I'll go find another lawyer.
If that's what it takes, you can go ahead, sir. But I tell you, son, we are the natives, and you are our slaves.
I'll see you around.
I'll see your land around. I can always recall the time of the tale of the two brothers. It was me and my brother Pedro. To introduce myself, my name is Felipe. I know the Mexican War tore apart my family. We all started off happily in Mexico. It was so nice. The land was fruitful. My mother and father were making well with their business. They were great farmers, even though we were peasants. But as time went on, it didn't last forever. That's when the Anglo-Saxons started to come in. And when they started coming in, they started changing everything, making different rules everywhere. And it caused my father to be concerned. That's why he fought in the Alamo. And when he fought, well, let's just say it made things worse for my family. We had to deal with my father's health going in and out, and I made my brother angry and frustrated. So that's when he went and go against the Americans. He went to enlist, and he started doing the whole soldier stuff. And me, I decided to go stay at home. And then I got tired of being at home. I wanted to make a living for myself. Like my brother was off to go be a soldier, and I know I had to bring some kind of money to the family because I wanted to bring them from Mexico to a better life. So that's when I went to America. The promise of the American dream just made me hopeful that I can go and get some money and bring it to my family, and like I said, maybe bring them up to America. So I worked on the railroads. They needed help. But little do I know, it was excruciating. I had to deal with the long hours and the sun and the low paying wages that they gave me. But I made ends meet. I saved and I saved. And everything was going well. I getting letters from my sister, nothing from my brother. Until that day. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was just working and working and working, and I didn't have a break. I was thirsty, I was hungry. And then one of my coworkers came to me and gave me a letter. I opened it up, it was from my brother. I was ecstatic. Pedro finally reached out to me. And it said he was fighting in the Mexican-American War. And I knew the war was going on, but I tend to my work. I'm not a fighter. I'd rather go and be content where I am. So I kept on working. And he wrote another letter to me and said, why would you not fight for your people? You are a Mexican. Now you're acting like an American. And I got so frustrated. How dare you call me that? I know who I am. And for him to go and say that, I was flabbergasted for it to come from my own brother. I was putting food on the table, I was helping out my mother, helping out my sister, and what did he go and do? Nothing. But just fights, fights, fights. And it wasn't going to get him nowhere. Not with the Americans. The white people, they know a lot. With technology, they are the superior. And because of that, I just leave them alone, and I tend to their ways, and I re-socialize myself, so I can be able to adjust and fit in. As time went on, I did not hear anything from my brother. I did not know if he was killed. I didn't know if he was alive. But I still hoped and prayed that he was safe somewhere. But to call myself an American, no. I am a Mexican that lives in America. And I will make sure you and anybody else never forget that. I know who I am, and I know my heritage.
My name is Susana Gomez. I remember my grandparents telling me that things were very prosperous when they were children before the Europeans came and started to colonize. They had many cows to produce milk and burros they could use for food and also to transport things from town back to home. That had changed by the time I was an adult. By the age of 34, I was married and had 3 children. My husband was a miner and he worked very hard and long hours. For extra money, my daughters and I would help me sell crops and milk and eggs at the local market. In 1836, my oldest son, Roberto Jr., was 16 and already fighting the whites to keep our land. My daughters, Anna, who was 15, and Elsa was 13, and they were both very helpful with tending to our land. We need the help of my husband though, Roberto. He had yet to go to war. One day when we were preparing dinner, Elsa brought Roberto a letter that we had received. We rarely received mail, and she did not understand that it probably was bad news. I remember Roberto slamming his fist on the table. He was so angry about receiving that letter. He had been called to fight for General Santa Anna in the Battle of San Jacinto, and he had to leave the very next day. After Roberto had to leave, things got very difficult for our family. Without the money coming in from my husband's mining work, we had to rely on money from our farming to live on, and times were very hard. Our crops were sparse, and the girls helped as best they could, but in the end, my husband never returned from the war. Roberto Jr. returned, though, and he picked up on Roberto Sr.'s mining work. He stayed with us until 1846 and was called into the Mexican-American War. We ended up losing the war and our land by 1848. Elsa, Anna, and I were forced to cross the vast Rio Grande, which was now the American border. We only had enough room to take a few personal belongings, 1 cow and 1 sheep. We had to start all over and live with our extended family. Roberto Jr. Decided to stay and work in America. We received multiple letters from him. He sends us money and tells us about his hard labor in America. We hope that he will one day return to us.
My name is Jose Ole Consueco III, and I was born just north of what's known as present-day El Paso, 1808. I have a wife, Maria, a daughter, Alejandra, and a son, Cordero. I was the only son in my family of 4, and eventually was given the family farm. My dad was always so concerned as to why I was so small in stature and why I never grew, but I was the only hope of continuing the family legacy. I remember my father voicing concern about not being able to grow grapes and olives, which grew very well where we lived. I think it was because Spain was afraid that the crops would compete with their harvests. My father taught me how to raise cattle and tend sheep instead. due to the abundant water supply and the nutritious grass. This is where, you may have heard of them, the Texas Longhorn cattle were first bred. Well, maybe not in my time, but around the late 1700s. My dad might have started it, who knows? Anyway, in 1821, when I was a young teenager, about 13, Mexico declared its independence from Spain. We flourished under Mexican rule, being able to grow any crops that we wanted. My mother and father died when I was 18, and I married, had my son in 1828 and my daughter in 1833. 3 years later, in 1836, Texas won its independence from Mexico through the Battle of San Jacinto. The Rio Grande was now known to be the international boundary line. I continued to tend my cattle and sheep and did a little dabbling of grape growing with the help of my son. As the years passed and we got by, in 1846, the Mexican-American War affected my family terribly. Cordero, who was 18, was called to fight for the Texan side. This left my wife, daughter, and I struggling to keep up with the duties of tending the crops and animals, some of which died before I could sell them. The war never gave Cordero back to us. We waited for his return, and each day, no one walked through our front door. Now my family made the ultimate sacrifice, fighting for the Texans, and we eventually had to leave our land and move south of the Rio because I couldn't show any paperwork saying my farm was mine. How was I supposed to do that when for over a century my family lived, cultivated, and owned land?
Thank you for watching our special on Mexican Americans in the Mexican-American War. Thank you and good night.